It's my personal pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Robert Kustra this afternoon. Dr. Kustra serves as president of Boise State University, the largest public university in Idaho, which has an enrollment of about 20,000 students and about 2,400 faculty and staff. President Kustra holds degrees from Benedictine College and Southern Illinois University, as well as a PhD in political science from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. With a long and distinguished career in public service in Illinois, Dr. Kustra served 2 terms as Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, following 10 years in the Illinois legislature. He also chaired the Illinois Board of Higher Education, which is responsible for the funding and oversight of Illinois' 9 public universities. Prior to joining Boise State, Dr. Kustra also served as president of Eastern Kentucky University and then later as the president of the Midwestern Higher Education Commission. He has held faculty positions at the University of Illinois Springfield, Loyola University of Chicago, the University of Illinois Chicago, and Northwestern University. Dr. Kustra was appointed in 2008 to the NCAA's highest governing body as a member of the Division I Executive Committee and Board of Directors. He served on the Presidential Task Force dealing with the future of intercollegiate athletics and is past president of the Western Athletic Conference Board of Directors. He also serves on the board of the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. In 2007, he was inducted into the Idaho Hall of Fame and was named the most influential person in Treasure Valley by the Idaho Statesman. Dr. Kustra hosts a weekly radio show entitled New Horizons for the National Public Radio affiliate in Boise, Idaho. Dr. Kustra's address this afternoon is entitled Modern College Athletics, A View from the Top. So please join me in giving him a warm St. Norbert College and Green Bay Packers welcome. Dr. Robert Kustra.
Thanks, Mike. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mike, for that nice introduction. It's great to be with Mike Marsden and Mary again. We spent some time together at Eastern Kentucky University. I've gotten to know this gentleman so very well. And the one thing I know about Mike Marsden, well, I know many things about Mike Marsden. I won't share all those with you. But I will tell you that this is a gentleman who has this instinct for the culture in which he lives. He knows how to analyze it, he knows how to dissect it, and most importantly, he knows how to celebrate it. And when I heard he was doing this particular conference, that he had come up with this idea, and that it was linked to the Green Bay Packers, I thought, you know, this is Mike all over again. Down in Richmond, Kentucky, when we were at Eastern Kentucky University, he was responsible for something called the Chautauqua Series, where we engaged our faculty and our staff and our students in visits from folks across the globe who would spend 2 or 3 or 4 days with us, zeroing in on one particular topic. And it was Mike's brainchild, as this is. And Mike, I know St. Norbert's is very fortunate to have you here and have you work on a program like this, along with this guy, Kevin Quinn. I can't say enough for how professional this program appeared when I first opened it up on the website, the incredible good fortune you've had, and the great planning in bringing people to the conference. It says a great deal about the program. President Kunkel's leadership here. I just have never really been on the St. Norbert campus. I'm from a Benedictine order, as my undergraduate work was at St. Benedict's, now Benedictine College. So I came expecting to see something similar, and I'm sure I have, but I don't know whether I was ready for the beauty of your campus, the programs across your campus, the dedication and the commitment that Mike has conveyed to me across this place. It's indeed a special place to be. To Mark Murphy and Betsy Mitchell, what a great inspiration the Green Bay Packers are to all of us, that they would decide to partner with St. Norbert's on a program like this that clearly could be perceived by some to be a little bit too academic for the professionals. We were talking about this earlier, but they understand the relevance of what they do, what we do in college and university athletics, to the broader role we play in society. And again, I can't say enough for the fact that they have come forth to do this. It was great meeting them this morning. I must give a couple of disclaimers. First of all, that title up there, I don't remember coming up, well, you'll notice the title up there is different than the one that's in the book. And that's because when I read the thing about from the top, I thought, you know, most mornings when I come to work, I don't exactly feel like I'm at the top. I feel somewhere in the middle or at the bottom, and that people are just kind of walking all over you. And so the top just didn't seem to work, and I thought maybe the office would sound a little better. So I at the last minute, threw the office up there, and whoever came up with the top, that's fine, but this may work better. Secondly, I wouldn't want anyone to think that I'm here speaking on behalf of the NCAA. I am fortunate enough to sit on the board of directors, and I have some insights today that I'm going to share with you, but believe me, I am not the NCAA, and even though I get one vote as a member of the board of directors, I am not authorized to speak on that organization's behalf. I think a great deal of the work that's been done, and as you will hear in a moment. Coming to Green Bay, this was my first time in Green Bay, and I must tell you that between the campus and the community, it's been an outstanding experience, especially flying in from Chicago up along the lake. Of course, I used to live in Chicago and had a cabin up in northern Wisconsin, and I relived all those memories, and then we flew right past Lambeau Field, and I almost missed it because it had a green football field, and I don't know, I just, you know, where I come from, they're blue, but then I saw the sign, it said Lambeau, and I understood, oh, that's right, there's still a few green football fields left in America. We're working on that. In fact, there's a small school out east that just changed to a blue football field, and so they had to come to us for approval to turn their field blue, like anybody else really wants to do it, right? We were talking, there's an old saw going around that once we did it, the NCAA hammered down a rule and said no more blue football fields. As far as I know, that's not the case. It's just that nobody else wants a blue football field. So you can figure that one out for yourself. One other thing I must mention, a year ago my athletic director came to me with an idea. And if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then the Green Bay Packers really ought to be flattered. Because he said, you know what they do up there in Green Bay? They sell shares of stock on that football team. And people buy those things, and they all show up in the summer, and they have a big board of directors meeting. We could do that here. We could sell Bronco stock. Sure enough, we have Bronco stock. You can buy it in the bookstore. It's $100 for a piece of paper, and frankly, that's all you're buying is a piece of paper, and you get a free frame with it, I guess. And we've sold enough that I think they've raised $20,000 already from our Bronco stock, and I guess it was the #1 Christmas present Broncos liked to exchange in this last Christmas season. So I'd like to publicly thank the Green Bay Packers for that idea. It seems to be working well for the Boise State Broncos as well. I'm going to begin my remarks today by saying one thing, and I'd like to close on the same theme. The reason why I chose to visit with you today and share some thoughts with you is for one thing, and that's simply the welfare of the student athlete. For those of us who cherish intercollegiate athletics, the role we play in intercollegiate athletics, it's simply about the welfare of the student athlete. I think Commissioner Tagliabue today did a very good job of making that point over and over again. And so as we begin this little ride through my PowerPoint that I assembled over the course of the last week or so, I ask you to bear in mind that what we're talking about is what is best for the student athlete who is an amateur, who in no way is a professional. And I also want you to bear in mind that I'm focusing on Division I athletics. Number one, because I don't know a thing about Division II or III athletics. And frankly, many would challenge that I know much about Division I athletics. But what I've learned about Division I athletics is that it is where this nexus of market forces and professionalism and commercialism beats up against the door of amateur athletics. And there is no question that the most difficult challenge we have is to cherish and protect amateur athletics. And it's Division I where the greatest challenges are. And I'm going to run through those with you in the next few moments. But boy, I'll tell you, Father DePoe at lunch in describing Vince Lombardi's uncompromised values really made me think about the challenges as we face in president's offices across Division I athletics. How, in fact, do you maintain the values that you know are best for your university's mission and role, that cherish the concept of a university as a learning community? And how do you integrate the role of athletics in such a way that it doesn't overwhelm the university as a learning community, but instead complements the university as a learning community? So what I'd like to do today is to hit on 3 or 4 topics. First of all, I'd like to give you some thoughts on what it's like from the President's office on a daily basis to work in athletics and to supervise or oversee athletics, and show you some of the challenges that we're presented with, for which, by the way, there's no rule book. That's for sure. They didn't, when I took the job, hand me a book that said, this will give you every answer that comes across your desk when it comes to an issue involving intercollegiate athletics. As a matter of fact, I would say that presidents of universities and colleges in general are probably better prepared in academic affairs, student affairs, financial affairs, across the board, until they get to athletics. Because if you stop and think about where presidents come from, they come from student affairs, most of them come from academic affairs, some of them come from financial affairs. Wherever they're coming from, they're not coming from athletics, and I'm not here to suggest they should. What I'm suggesting is that when that president, with all this great university and college experience, arrives in the president's office and is told by the NCAA, you're in charge. The integrity of this program is on your shoulders. He or she is going to have to stop and scratch their head and think, where did I get that experience? How am I going to use the rudder of this ship to craft a course that is going to work for this university? I think that's the great challenge we're all facing right now, and I'm going to mention one individual in particular who is no longer with us. Miles Brand died earlier this year. He was a great example of presidential leadership in intercollegiate athletics, and I'll comment on that in a moment, but I think you'll agree with me that he's the reason why we can be so successful at what we do, and at least now we have a roadmap on how to get there. What I hope to help you with today is what the challenges are in reading that roadmap. And I'm going to talk about Miles' leadership, and then I'm going to talk about the changing landscape of college football, and then I'm going to share with you a few thoughts I have on something called the BCS. And I think you have to understand that when you stand at this podium, where I stand depends on where I sit. And I sit as a member of a non-automatic qualifying conference, and I'm sure there's some of you in the room who don't have a clue what that is, but maybe by the end of this presentation you may know something about it, and if you're like me, you'll scratch your head and wonder how that happened, but we'll get to that in a few moments. Let's begin. Oh, how to keep them from turning pro. I should explain that for a moment. Now, obviously, I use that term because that's usually what coaches worry about, right? Oh, is he going to leave after his 3rd year? Are we going to lose him for the senior year? Needless to say, what I'm talking about is how do you keep the university and the program from turning pro? That's the challenge in Division I athletics. And I don't think there's any doubt that most of what we're going to talk about today is related in one form or fashion to making sure that the university's mission and role at the end of the day has all the integrity attached to it that it had before the last game or before the last victory, and that we are still that learning community that puts the welfare of all of our students first and the welfare of our student athletes first as well. I like to give this speech whenever I open up a speech in front of fans especially, donors. We have donors who love to give to athletics. Some of them aren't as good at giving to academics, and we're working on that. But when the speech opens up, I always like to say, now I want everybody to understand, we are a university that happens to have an athletic program attached to it. We are not an athletic program that happens to have a university attached to it. And it's a distinction that I make over and over again to help people understand the primacy of the academic mission, the university mission, in the overall intercollegiate atmosphere, which, especially in Division I, can really get out of hand. All you have to do is turn on one of these sports talk shows in any community in America where there's a major university football program or basketball program, and by the third caller, you feel like you want to be the fourth caller saying, excuse me, you do understand those are student athletes? You do understand they're undergraduates working on their bachelor's degree? You do understand that they are not pros? You do understand that we can't just jettison them from the program because you don't think they've performed well the last 3 games? He happens to be majoring in business, and he happens to have a career designed for him beyond football. And as the NCAA likes to say in that very famous ad, what, 99% of our student athletes are going to turn professional someday, and it won't be in sports. Well, again, you listen to talk radio most of the time, those sports shows, and they don't get it at all. And we absolutely have to change that mindset. So how does a president assure the former, that is, that you have a university with an athletic program, and not the latter, that you have an athletic program that happens to have a university attached to it? Here's a breakdown of the various issues that I come across on a regular basis that in one way or another deals with this issue. And to start with the first one on compliance, I'm going to fast forward to the next one. Take a look at this quote from Michael Oriard. Oriard is a distinguished professor of literature. I think he holds a chair at Oregon State University. But just as interesting, he is a former member of the Notre Dame football team. I think he was All-American, and he played for the Kansas City Chiefs for 4 years. The NCAA has been guided ever since it first took on regulatory powers in the 40s by a universal assumption that member schools will cheat. There's a great line for you. I figured I'd have him say it. Rules must be so numerous and precise and enforcement so effective that cheating will be minimized. The result? An NCAA manual thicker than the Manhattan phone book. And sitting on the board of directors of the NCAA, I must say that that has become one of the concerns of the presidents, is that the rules, the regulations are so out of hand that there are few people in intercollegiate athletics or university life that could begin to understand what they are. But we must. And in the last few years, thanks in part to Miles Brand's leadership, he has directed us in this area. And when he was alive, he made sure that he convened a group of presidents. It was about presidential control. And one of the things he said was, look, historically, compliance officers are always found in athletic departments, in almost all cases. He said, I have to believe we have to shift that reporting line to the president. And so now you have at least dotted lines running from the compliance officer directly to the president, because if you stop and think about it, if somebody's going to break rules, intentionally or unintentionally, it's going to be over in the athletic office. If no one is watching the athletic office but the athletic director and his or her staff, then you have to ask the question whether or not something might get overlooked, and isn't it a good idea to have somebody out of that direct reporting relationship over in athletics working in compliance. And today, more than ever, I think we're going to have to do that. In fact, we're getting ready to hire a new compliance officer, and that compliance officer will have a dotted line to me, but report to my university counsel, who is really my, I guess you could call him my conscience and my guide when it comes to the answer to most of the questions that I will be dealing with here on this slide. So when it comes to compliance, absolutely critical. We must get more serious about compliance than we've ever been before. Branding is a very interesting issue, especially in an era when alcohol companies really like to jump on the opportunity to associate themselves with winning intercollegiate programming. And so the example that I don't know much about, but I remember it happening, is not too long ago Anheuser-Busch decided that they would start marketing their Budweiser cans with the logo of the university on the back side. And they started sending them out all over the country, and the minute they did, they caught all kinds of grief from people who really didn't feel that it was appropriate to brand the university or the university's athletic program with a beer company. And my recollection is that actually Budweiser then either called or wrote all of the presidents in some way. They communicated with us, told us that if we wanted to remove ourselves from their program, we could do so. That was, of course, after they caught quite a bit of flack. And I know we were one that called in and said, please take us off of that. We do not want to be affiliated with a beer company. I hate to say that in Wisconsin, but nonetheless, we do not want to be affiliated with a beer company as far as the university or the athletic program is concerned. I can think of all kinds of examples. I was on the job 2 months in Boise when the athletic director comes in and says, I've got a naming opportunity. We're going to change Bronco Stadium. It's going to have a new name. And I won't say what the name is, but the name was the name of one of these money lending companies. And this is where, you know, where's the rule book? Could I have the chapter on naming stadia and what's appropriate and what isn't? Well, there was no such rule book, but I'm thinking, I don't know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'd only been in the community 2 months. I didn't know the culture of the community the way I do now, but a money lending company? From Bronco Stadium to a money lending company? So I gathered a few people together who were actually on my search committee, the stalwarts of the community, lived their whole lives in Boise, love the Broncos, and I said, I just need some help here. I said, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do. Can you help me? Well, they agreed, and we didn't do it, but how would I have known? Again, common sense and good judgment, you hope will come to your rescue, but I can find too many examples out there in the real world, and I've stumbled once or twice myself to know that it doesn't always work for you. We have an arena on campus too that we now call Taco Bell Arena, and I'm still taking grief about that. Again, it all comes down to what your fans and what your campus thinks the arena ought to really be about, or for that matter, any naming opportunity. Naming opportunities can always be difficult. Discipline is clearly something that in Division I athletics anyway has to be dispatched quickly and formidably so people know it and they understand it. We played the University of Oregon last year in football, and you might remember if you watch any of ESPN for days and days, they replayed the smack that one of our players took when the Oregon player after the game decked him, and our player had said something to him. The Oregon player was in Sports Illustrated being quoted as saying, those guys are really going to get an ass whomping, quote unquote. And so after the game, one of our players decided to say, hey, how about that? We won the game. Hey, how about that for? And the Oregon player didn't take kindly to it, and he was nailed for it. Now, this is an interesting study in how you deal with an issue like that. The next day, I get a call from the president of the University of Oregon, by the way, who is a Sanskrit specialist. That's his academic specialty. He's on the job 2 months, and back to my point, what are we doing in these jobs? How do we begin to know? And he has to figure out how to discipline this guy that threw the punch. And he called me to apologize. He was on campus, by the way. I had met him for the first time. And he then said, well, we're going to come up with a penalty that equals the crime, or whatever, however you want to put it. And my response to him was, you know, let's not forget that we created this system. You and your coaches, my coaches as well, we created this system that recruits these kids. And they bring them to our campuses, and they invest in them because they want to be winners instead of losers. And then when something goes wrong, sometimes anyway, we're forced to exact such an enormous penalty on a young man or a young woman that we could destroy their entire life and career. And so rather than send this kid back to wherever he came from, and I didn't know the specifics of that, let's take that into account. And again, I shouldn't be lecturing him. It's his decision to make. As you may know, the initial penalty was suspension for the rest of the season, and then somewhere in the middle or 3/4 through the season, they decided to let him play again, and he ended up playing in postseason play. He played in the Rose Bowl, I believe, and that's probably as it should be. In the meantime, we were asked to discipline our player. He was disciplined. He was disciplined more quietly. To be honest about it, we did not think his infraction of simply repeating that line that the player used in Sports Illustrated was anything near of the magnitude of smacking a player on the field after a game. But nonetheless, it's a great issue of a university having to respond immediately to discipline. And of course, every Saturday afternoon or whatever day of the week we're playing, we must think about how are we going to react. And presidents essentially must direct athletic directors to make, and coaches to make sure that the penalty fits the crime. I'll be honest about it, I don't have to worry about that very much at Boise State. We have a coach who actually sent one of our first string football players home 2 days before the Fiesta Bowl when we beat Oklahoma because he came in at 2:30. One night they gave him a 2 o'clock curfew and he got in at 2:30 and he was on the plane the next day on his way home. I must tell you, there were a lot of us who were like, whoa, did we really need to go that far, Coach? Good for him, and I'm jesting when it comes to that. Of course it was the right thing to do. That sends a message to the rest of the team that there'll be no goofing around from this moment on, and this is a program of integrity and you follow the rules, much like Coach Lombardi exacted from his players. I mentioned alcohol usage already, but obviously the role of alcohol on a campus is a difficult one when you're educating students and when students are underage, and whether it's at the stadium or whatever, it has to be dealt with very carefully. We played Fresno State a few years ago, and I went to the game down in Fresno. They served beer and maybe wine, I don't even know, at the stadium, and by the third quarter, it wasn't literally not safe to walk around there in anything sporting our blue and orange colors. Managed to get out of that stadium without getting accosted in some fashion, but I registered my concerns. So did a lot of other people. Apparently something, not because of that incident, but overall something must have gone wrong for the system, because the California state system about a year later or so banned alcohol from all of their stadia for football games, and nothing could be more appropriate as far as I'm concerned. Compensation obviously is a hot topic today in intercollegiate athletics in Division I. It's grown out of it's out of hand, and of course I'm going to talk about the arms race in a moment. One of the problems that the NCAA has, there's no question that compensation is tied to AD and coach selection. Everybody's trying to hold on to their coach. Probably the most interesting story I can tell on compensation and coaches is a story about the University of Oklahoma game, our famous game, the Fiesta Bowl of 2007. At that game, when we analyzed who spends how much on football and coaches' salaries, we discovered that our entire football budget was a couple of $100,000 less than Coach Stoops' salary alone from the University of Oklahoma. So here's this school getting to the Fiesta Bowl period with a budget smaller than the coach's salary alone. Forget everything else that by the time you add up the rest of that budget, it was probably, again, half the size. It's a very interesting statement of how much money has been poured into athletics. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, we no sooner got back to campus and the AD comes into my office and said, how are we going to hold on to Coach Peterson? And he said, you know, we're going to have to increase his salary. And my recollection is that we increased his salary at least $500,000, and he became almost $1 million coach. Now he's way more than $1 million coach. Again, when you compare his salary to the salary of some of the folks in the SEC and the Big Ten, we don't even rank. But nonetheless, it's an issue that the NCAA is going to have to deal with. I threw the president's role in recruiting student athletes on there because I do have a policy of inviting all the coaches in our program to bring their prospective student athletes and their parents. to my office. If they think that I can give a Chamber of Commerce sell, if they think that I can stress the importance of the word student before the word athlete, whatever it might be. And it's a great opportunity for me to tell, especially parents, the story of our graduation rate for student athletes. Most people don't understand that our student athletes graduate on time. Our student athletes graduate at a faster, more rapid rate than our normal student body. Again, they have significant academic support, and they have these coaches breathing down their necks. And the fact of the matter is that I can tell that story to parents and make sure parents understand that we're committed not just to their success on the field or the court or wherever, but we're committed to their success as graduates, and we want them to walk across that aisle at some point so we can celebrate their success. So there you have a rough idea of some of the decisions that go into what comes of the daily life of a president. I'm going to jump now to the NCAA and look at the challenge of controlling and directing and leading athletics, not from the president's office, but from the NCAA. And just overall, I will say, and I know there's many of you that know this story better than I do, perhaps, but when the NCAA was looking for a leader a few years ago, for the first time, the presidents decided to exert some control over the organization. And the presidents decided it was time for a university president to be the head of the NCAA. And so in 2003, Miles Brand, then the president of Indiana University, or at least at one point, I don't remember, I think he came straight to the job from Indiana, became the president of the NCAA. Miles was a philosophy professor before he became a distinguished educator and administrator. Believe he did a stint as president on the West Coast and then came to Indiana University, or he might have been in some other capacity, I don't remember. But as the way I look at it, and I could be off base, I've never read the history of this, Miles Brand was able to get the job as NCAA president because he fired Bobby Knight, because he took on the athletic establishment, because he sent a message that no matter how great your fame is, no matter how independent you think you are of this university, no matter how much you think you can say publicly about things that could only be deemed outrageous by normal thinking people, we in the president's office maintain the job of supporting and protecting the integrity of the university. And when you get out of line, after how many times, how many infractions, you're gone. And he was gone. And when Bobby Knight was fired, everybody turned to Miles Brand and thought, wow, if that guy can pull that off, then why don't we have him over at the NCAA? So Miles Brand comes along, and Miles Brand decides to tackle the major challenges facing intercollegiate athletics at that time, and frankly, today. I'll get to that, but it's not like we've settled all these. The first one, the academic progress rate, may be the only one that you could say is settled. And we now have a new way of rating college athletic programs with the APR. And I'll 2 points awarded each term to student athletes who meet academic eligibility standards and who remain with the institution. A team's APR is the total points earned by the team at a given time divided by the total points possible. Please don't ask me any questions beyond that. Then the next thing, this is what's important. 925 is the cut score the Division I Board of Directors approved for immediate penalties. An APR score of 925 out of 1,000 translates to an approximate 60% graduation rate. And by the way, just to give you an example, I was asking our AD before the meeting, and in 2008 and 9, we had a 986 APR. So we were close to 1,000. Which shows you that, to be honest about it, I couldn't stand up here and talk about these subjects if I couldn't demonstrate to you that we were walking the walk instead of just talking the talk. And in all seriousness, I don't deserve a lot of credit from this, because I've only been at Boise State since 2003. But my athletic director is in his 29th year as the athletic director of Boise State. He has not only an undergraduate degree, but a law degree from Loyola Marymount, His family is very well educated. They're all right now in graduate school or out of graduate school. He's deeply committed to academic excellence across the board. He is absolutely devoted to student athlete and academic excellence in the program, and that is the reason why we are so close. We just learned the other day that our football team had an APR. The APRs run for the teams, and they run for then they average them all out for the whole university. But we had an APR of 974 for the football team, which we just missed out on being in the top 10% of the nation. About half of our football team has 3.0s and above. It's very impressive academic records, and I will tell you that our coaches are not shy about pointing out that when they recruit for students who obviously, first of all, know how to play whatever sport they're recruiting for, but at the same time, they recruit to make sure somebody is actually going to be serious about their studies and will graduate. And if they see a problem child, we think you ought to go someplace else. And I've met plenty of recruits at our sessions that we have in January that I ask a couple of months later, what happened to that guy you were so high on from, California? No, we don't want to go there. That's not something we want to do. So academic reform, getting back to my PowerPoint here, creeping professionalism, the arms race, crass commercialism. Just to give you an idea of what I mean by creeping professionalism, it is not uncommon now in Division I basketball for agents to emerge in the lives of young basketball players and their parents in high school. As early as maybe freshman, sophomore year in high school, someone called a runner or an agent will present himself to the family and say, you hang on to me and I'll take you wherever you want to go, through to the best university experience and then on to play pro ball. And these agents, many feel, are largely responsible for the fact that by the time the student gets to university, it's not about academics at all. It's not about finishing university at all. It's simply about playing basketball and getting into the pros. And I don't know what they call themselves, the Collegiate Basketball Coaches Association actually is addressing this issue right now. But I remembered a statistic when we were talking about this on the NCAA board, and I wasn't sure of it, so I emailed the NCAA just earlier this morning and said, can you confirm this number for me that I think I remember seeing? It was such an astounding number that I thought I must have it wrong. 40% of basketball players who entered Division I universities to play basketball are gone from the institution that recruited them by the end of the second year in university work. They're gone. They've either transferred to another university, usually the work of an agent who starts talking to the family, the coach is not playing you enough. There's a better program over here. We can do better over there. Or, who knows, dropping out, whatever. But the fact of the matter is, I don't have to tell you what the graduation rate will be of those student athletes who are led around by runners or agents. And that is clearly something that the NCAA now understands and recognizes as a problem. Haven't dealt with it yet. There's a long, long bureaucratic process of taking legislation through the NCAA, but it does look to the credit of the basketball coaches that they'll be leading this effort. Academic, creeping professional, and crass commercialism, same thing. I'll just quote Miles Brand. He says, "No ironclad specific criteria for judging when commercial interests overwhelm collegiate sports." And then he says, student athletes are amateurs, not paid pros. That implies they cannot accept payment for endorsing or advertising any commercial product. They cannot be put in a position in which reasonable person interprets the student athlete as endorsing or advertising a commercial product or a service. Again, I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot of work to be done. And I thought, why not throw Robert Frost in here? You remember this poem? The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. I never even thought of the fact that it was Miles Brand that started us on this journey, so that was not an attempt to play off a word. But so it is with collegiate athletics, because I don't want to repeat myself, but if you look right here at this list, you'll see it looks remarkably similar to the list that I suggested, not Miles Brand, brought to the NCAA. The fact is, controlling athletic expenditures, what I call the arms race, we haven't touched that one, and I'd like to know how they're going to, or how we're going to, for as long as I'm on the board anyway. It's going to be tough. Finding the right balance between crass commercialism and the need to fund Division I sports, there's a great challenge that's going to require the wisdom of Solomon, and protecting the student athlete from exploitation. Again, the fourth one, I put it staying the course, because there's the one, academic reform, where I think we figured it out. As a matter of fact, the last thing we figured out is if we're going to apply this APR to universities, fine. But what about coaches? What if we applied it to coach? What if every coach in America walked around with an APR on his forehead or her forehead? What if when a president was asked by an AD to sign the employment papers for the next football coach, I could say, "Can I see his APR?" And I get a look at how successful this coach has been at moving students through the system. Or maybe it's a basketball program where everybody's leaving to go pro and nobody's coming back to graduate. The APR is going to show that. The APR is going to plummet in places like that. So the coaches will all have their own APR. I believe that that's operational either later this year or next year, and I think it's a great way to make sure we get the job done. Now, I'd like to talk about the changing landscape of college football. I'm running out of time here, and I want to make sure that I get finished and leave a little time for Q&A. There are some things changing about college football, and the reason why I can stand before you and tell you that in the preseason polls, Boise State is ranked number 2 in the nation. In fact, I have to admit, when I first came to Boise State, in one of the conversations I had as a candidate, somebody mentioned nationally ranked, and I really didn't even understand what they were talking about. I thought, well, there must be some other ranking system other than that one I knew as a Big Ten guy, and they couldn't possibly be in the same ranking that those schools are in. Well, we were, and it just is for this reason. A proliferation of TV games. ESPN comes along, and ESPN decides, well, we're not going to compete on Saturday, but we can do a Sunday night game, we can do a Tuesday night game, we can do a Thursday night game. We've played almost every day of the week or night except Sunday morning. I mean, I don't think we've played Sunday night, we've played Monday night. We'll play whenever they want us to play because it's our way to get the marketing. I tell my friends, I'm a Cubs fan, and I tell my friends it's like having WGN on your side. WGN exports the Cubs across the country, and ESPN over the last 10 years has exported the Broncos across the country to the point where I receive email on a regular basis from people who just pick up our games on ESPN. Well, obviously that helps with recruiting. There's no question about it. When these parents come in to my office and I say, well, so why Boise State? You know, you're in the backyard of Oregon State. You're in the backyard of Cal Berkeley. You're in the backyard of Arizona State. Why Boise State? Well, the first thing they do is talk about how many times they've seen us on TV. Needless to say, since the Fiesta Bowl, 2 victories now in the Fiesta Bowl, those will come up as well. That's always nice to have those notches on your gun. But the fact of the matter is, it helps a lot to get that exposure, whether you're East Carolina University, whether you're Northern Illinois University, wherever you are in the so-called mid-major range. That's changed things. And all of a sudden, mid-majors are popping out of that middle ground. The spread offense. I don't pretend to know much about football since my high school playing days, but obviously the spread offense is one that depends on speed, not size. Size is real easy for a recruiter to figure out when he's out in the high schools recruiting. Speed's a little tougher to figure out. And part of our success at Boise State is finding guys who are a little shorter and perhaps not quite as bulky as some of the big guys that were reputed to be fast, but we went after speed And we were able to find these niches throughout California, Oregon, and Washington. And that leads, again, to mid-major programs breaking out. Higher salaries and bigger budgets, there's no doubt about it, that we're much more serious about budgeting for athletics today than we ever were before. And by the way, most of our, I don't know how it works elsewhere, but where we're from, there's a state limitation on the state appropriation. So the fact is we raise our athletic expenditures mainly from donors and from a student athletic fee that raises a few million a year. But it's not money coming from state government or from university funds, and that makes it much easier for our faculty to accept the role that intercollegiate athletics plays in the life of a university when they know it's not competing with the funds that they're getting for salaries. The 85 scholarship limit, there was a time, again, back when I knew nothing about intercollegiate athletics, or I at least wasn't responsible for them, but there was a time when there was no limit, so you had the large programs just stockpiling student athletes. You can't do that anymore. It is, in this one respect, a level playing field as far as football is concerned. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about where it's not a level playing field, but by making 85 scholarship limit, there's no question that you helped places like the Boise State and the University of Utah and Fresno State and other places that have managed to get themselves into major bowl games. Enter the BCS. It's 1992, and the BCS comes along, and you have basically a breakout. The large conferences establish what they call the automatic qualifying conferences. I put that in big print because each of them have a vote, and then the small conferences over on the right, the non-automatic qualifying conferences, and there's a, by the way, Notre Dame should not be on that list. That's a mistake. Notre Dame is an independent, and Notre Dame sits at the table of the automatic qualifying conferences, and for reasons I will never understand, gets a full vote, just like each conference of the automatic qualifying conferences. I think that's some gesture today's gone by. It certainly isn't a gesture to the current situation. This went out yesterday, and I'm going to discuss this in a moment, but just briefly I wanted to show you this chart because yesterday the Mountain West sent this out, and basically what it shows is that if you take a look at TV ratings, rankings, and attendance, either the Western Athletic Conference, which we're in, or the Mountain West Conference, which is the University of Utah and Brigham Young and Air Force Academy and TCU, when you get to revenue, you can see what happens. As a result of the BCS formula, the ACC and the Big East walk away with significant revenue over either, the blue bar is either the WAC or the Mountain West, depending on who was in the bowl that year. That's 2007 to 2009. That's an analysis of the years 2007, 2009, as you can see up there. And take a look at TV ratings. Our TV ratings were higher. Our rankings were about the same as the Big East, but higher than ACC. In attendance, in either case, we were higher than the ACC and the Big East, and yet look at what the ACC and the Big East walks away with. This is I don't know whether it's the last one or not, but it is certainly a significant inequity that remains in intercollegiate athletics today. And what I find interesting about this is that one of the presidents who has the unfortunate job of trying to defend the BCS said, talking about the non-automatic qualifiers, go back to the, talking about the non-automatic qualifiers, he said, those teams have certainly performed well, but you're talking about adding value. The real question is whether including those conferences when you negotiate a TV contract adds to the willingness of the network to increase the bid. I don't think we've seen evidence that that's true. Well, Mr. President, there's the evidence. There's the evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt. And today the media is running around trying to figure out what to do with this information, but we're delighted they have it. So when Boise State defeated the University of Oregon last year, the dream of a national championship should have beaten in the hearts of every player, coach, and fan. Instead, there was a faint pulse thanks to the constraints that are placed upon us by the BCS. Yes, we did eventually, as you know, get a BCS Bowl where we were pitted against TCU, another school from a non-automatic qualifying conference, amid speculation that the BCS had once again found a way to fix the system and avoid having TCU play in the national championship, as many thought their record and strength of schedule should have dictated. But it gets even more interesting if you look over recent years. In 2004, Boise State went undefeated, finished 9th in the season in the BCS, yet was excluded from a BCS Bowl. Number 13, Michigan, and 21, Pittsburgh, qualified. In 2006, Boise State went undefeated, finished the season ranked 8th in the BCS, was invited to the BCS Fiesta Bowl, where, of course, we beat Oklahoma in one of the greatest games ever played. In 2008, Boise State went undefeated, finished the season number 9 in the BCS, yet was passed over for a BCS Bowl, while number 10, Ohio State, 12, Cincinnati, and 19, Virginia Tech were all chosen for BCS Bowls. In 2008, the University of Utah made the most convincing case for BCS reform when the Mountain West Conference University completed a 12-0 regular season, but was not given the opportunity to compete for the national championship. Utah was eliminated by a system, not a team, and further proved its championship status in a convincing BCS Bowl victory over Alabama. While I'm rattling off these statistics, think about the Butler game. Think about the Sweet 16. Think about the opportunity the teams have, the small guys have, from the very beginning. The NCAA's Sweet 16 tournament is the perfect example of the way competition should work in intercollegiate athletics. And history has the opportunity to present itself again, as we're, again, as I said, usually ranked number 2 in the preseason polls for this fall. We open up at FedEx Stadium in Washington, D.C. against Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech is ranked 4 or 5, something like that. They're right up there. There's one major difference between these teams and their chances of playing in a BCS Bowl or the national championship. Thanks to the current BCS criterion, if Boise State loses, our chances of getting into a BCS Bowl are severely damaged, even if we win every other game. The BCS likes to tout that every game counts, but that's only true for Boise State. If Virginia Tech loses all of its non-conference games this coming season, it still will get a chance to go to a BCS game. How can this happen? The NCAA sponsors 88 championships in almost every sport, from bowling to water polo. The glaring exception is football. That, of course, is where the football bowl subdivision, formerly Division 1A, created the BCS. The 6 automatic qualifiers, there they are, right up there. These exclusionary rules that produce such unfair results can only be made by a governance structure as unfair as the result, and that is certainly the case when it comes to the Presidential Oversight Committee of the BCS. You remember the book Animal Farm? George Orwell wrote the book Animal Farm, and in the book there's a great quote that says, well, all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so you have it with the BCS, because the BCS power structure has it so there are 65 schools in the automatic qualifying conferences that have 6 votes, 1 for each conference on the left. And then, but the 51 schools in the non-automatic qualifying conference have 1 vote. They all share 1 vote. And as I said earlier, in a gesture to days gone by, Notre Dame has 1 vote as an independent, all to itself. Go figure. Nowhere is the inequality of the BCS system more evident than in revenue distribution. The formula is heavily weighted toward the automatic qualifying conferences. In a way, that chart that I just showed you shows that, but just to give you some numbers, there's an $18 million payout that goes with the bowl. The automatic qualifying conferences in Notre Dame receive 90% of the $142.5 million generated by the BCS bowls. A monopoly, if uncovered in the business world, would lead to a Department of Justice antitrust investigation, and the fact of the matter is that may happen anyway. But by the way, over the next 4 years, the BCS estimates that the size of that pool will increase $40 million a year. thanks to media revenue. If a non-qualifying conference qualifies for a BCS game, 82% of the revenue goes to the automatic qualifying conference and Notre Dame, while the non-automatic qualifying conference receives 18%. I had to read that about 3 or 4 times when they first gave me that statistic, because that made no sense in the world, why you give all the money to the conference that wasn't responsible for getting there. Both U.S. House and Senate committees have expressed continued interest in applying the principles of fairness to intercollegiate football. The U.S. Senate Antitrust Committee, Senator Orrin Hatch, looking out for his University of Utah, held hearings last summer. The Department of Justice has expressed an interest. Congressman Joe Barton of Texas introduced legislation in our nation's capital that really is, I think the way the legislation is worded, it would prevent the BCS from labeling a game a national championship unless it was the outcome of a playoff system. And that's an interesting angle, because Joe Barton is doing that, as I understand it, at the behest of Mack Brown, the Texas coach. The Texas coach, even though part of this system that clearly discriminates against the folks on the right here, the Texas coach wants a playoff. He says, let's be fair about this. Let's give everybody an equal chance. Let's do it the way basketball does it. I don't know whether that legislation will ever move forward. I'm not so sure the answer to solving this issue is in Congress or even in the Justice Department. But I do know that advocates of a playoff for Division I football claim that the time has come for the FBS to go the way of the other 3 divisions of NCAA football, basketball, and other sports, and actually have a playoff system that's based on actual play rather than computers and opinion polls, which is the way it works now. To bottom line this, now I'm getting back to where I started, the welfare of the student athlete. 6,000 student athletes a year in Division I football show up at the beginning of the season to compete, the way they do at Ole Miss, the way they do at Wisconsin, the way they do at Illinois, the way they do at Oregon and Oregon State. But those 6,000 students playing over there in the non-automatic qualifying conferences don't have a prayer of ever getting to a BCS bowl or playing in a national championship, given the way the BCS has written the rules. I'm going to let other people debate the playoff system. If somebody lays a plan out on a playoff system, I'll be glad to evaluate it. I know that everybody's concerned that a playoff system not take too much time, because that's time away from studies. And just like the NCAA tried to expand the conference tournament to 96 this year, they finally backed off of that when they realized it was going to keep basketball student athletes away from studies too much. And for the same reason, I think we have to be very concerned about that. But there's plenty of people more qualified than I to debate that playoff system, including the President of the United States, of course, who has publicly endorsed the concept. But until then, it is entirely within the province of the BCS to make the changes necessary to the current structure to align the values of fairness and access so invoked in higher education on our campuses across the country to the policies and practices of the BCS and the NCAA. There's that old saw about the veteran lawyer who was instructing the young lawyer on how to present himself in court. And he said, when you've got the facts on your side, you pound away at the facts. And when you have the law on your side, you pound away at the law. And when you don't have either one of them on your side, pound away at the table. And that's what the BCS is doing today. It's pounding away at the table. It doesn't have the law on its side, and if it's not careful, it's going to run right up against the Department of Justice. And it certainly doesn't have the facts on its side, as you can see from that chart and many others I could produce for you. And I know this from experience, because when Boise State starts planning its schedule 3 years from now or 4 years from now, we call all these folks up. And first of all, most of them don't want to play you at all. They'd just as soon not take a chance. But if they do take a chance, it's like, well, we'll play you at our place. And we say, well, if you're going to play at our place, then you come to, no, we won't come to your place. And there's significant, I'm going to have an article out on this in the next few months that shows the research. I've got a couple of people working on it on our campus, but it's a fairly significant discrimination against the smaller mid-major schools, and I must at the same time say that there are some programs which will do home and home. We're going to go to Ole Miss in 2 years, and we'll play Ole Miss, and it'll be it's going to be a home and home, and we're playing Oregon State. Oregon State and Oregon have both done home and homes with us. Probably don't want to do that anymore, but they're hooked into it now, and we'll keep things moving. But the fact of the matter is that it's another interesting way of the larger programs, in a sense, stacking the deck. And the reason I bring it up is because if you follow this stuff, one of the first questions you should be asking me is, what about strength of schedule? You guys don't play the big guys every week the way the Big 12 plays each other all season long and gets beat up. Well, believe me, if we could, we might. But try to play the big boys. And what you have is a system where they rig it in such a way that, yeah, we might play you, but if we do, it's going to be at our home, and no, there will not be a reciprocal game. So we've prepared legislation that requires home and home, non-conference scheduling of games across the board in the NCAA. And the final thing I will say is that it's probably time for the NCAA to dive into this and take a look at this whole issue, which they haven't done to date. Getting back to my very first point, let's talk about the welfare of the student athlete. If we're going to put a student athlete out on a field to play football or basketball, isn't it only fair that that student athlete have an equal opportunity, an equal chance to get to the finish line? In football, in America today, in Division I today, that is not possible. The welfare of the student athlete. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry I went so long. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Yes, in the back there, right there.
Thank you. I'm Scott Nicolai from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville Division III institution, but I follow Division I athletics quite closely. I'm wondering what your take is on the news and stuff we've been reading and hearing quite a bit lately about possible universities moving to different conferences.
Conference realignment. Thanks, Scott. I have a personal interest in it, in that for the last 6 years, I've been requesting, pleading, advocating for Boise State to leave the Western Athletic Conference and join the Mountain West Conference, which is more intermountain competition for us. Right now, we're in a conference that sends our student athletes to Hawaii and Louisiana. Ruston, Louisiana, where Louisiana Tech is. And those are great places for vacation. At least I think Ruston's a good place for vacation. But in any event, it's not a good place to send your student athletes. And so I've been doing everything I can to get into a conference where there's competition that affords our students more time at home and more time with their studies. It's hard to know where to begin with the rumors. What always seems to happen is that it starts east and moves west. And obviously that's what's happening now with the Big Ten under consideration for expansion. That would affect the Big 12. That would affect the Mountain West. I honestly, and the Pac-10's talking about expanding as well. I don't think anyone on this day can say what's going to happen, except something is probably going to happen, especially when it comes to the Pac-10, at least from what I've been reading. And once that starts moving, for example, the Pac-10 or the Big Ten expands and takes in TCU in Texas, in Dallas. So now you have an opening in the Mountain West, and that brings us in, but then University of Utah gets picked off for the Pac-10. Now that opens up another slot in the Mountain West, and they decide to go with Nevada, Reno, or Fresno State. On the East Coast, there's Rutgers, there's Syracuse, there's all kinds of schools that are in the mix. And to be honest about it, because I've spent the last 7 years on the West Coast, I really don't pretend to have a real fix on how things are coming down east of the Mississippi, as well as I know the way things would line up west of the Mississippi. There's lots of commentary about what would happen if there's these huge conferences and less competition, some argue. I honestly don't know how to comment on that. In a way, I feel the way Paul Tagliabue felt this morning when he was asked to comment on the Supreme Court decision. I just don't have enough good information. I certainly don't get any information about what's going on. Wherever it's going on, it must be in those conference commissioner offices, and I guess we're going to all learn sooner or later.
Hi, yeah. What would you think about a promotion and relegation system for Division I-A football, similar to what they do in Europe with their professional sports teams? So teams that have had a good 10-year run, like Boise State has, would get moved up, and teams from these conferences to the left, or the entire ACC for that matter, could get relegated so that they weren't sort of clogging up things in terms of the quality of the play.
Yeah. So, it sounds like a deal to me. I honestly am unfamiliar with, did you say the European?
In European soccer, every year, and in football they would probably have to do every 4 or 5 years, but the teams are at the bottom of the standings. They go down like a level, like from major league to minor league.
Right.
And the teams in the minor leagues that are very good for that period, they get moved up. So you could have a system where maybe the top 50 or 60 teams nationally are in the BCS, and they play each other all year, and those that are at the bottom after a 4 or 5 year period, they go down a level, and teams that had been performing well on the underneath, they get moved up.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Probably the biggest problem with that, it certainly is a fair way of doing it. The issue is there's a very unfair way of deciding to do it. And so whether it's the NCAA, I mean, the board I sit on, I think if you took the vote, the folks on the left are going to have a majority of the votes. Obviously, in the BCS, the votes are from the conferences on the left in control. So as good of an idea as that may be, that probably literally would take a Department of Justice edict, and obviously that's not going to happen. But it makes a lot of sense. It's just that the way the votes are stacked now, not very likely that they're going to go there. I think what's more likely is that on this vote issue, the BCS one day gets some religion, takes so much flack in the media and from pressure from fans. I can't believe the number of emails I get from fans who are fans of teams in these conferences on the left, who write me and say, you know, I'm really a big Nebraska fan, but I got to tell you, this isn't fair. And you folks have to be treated fairly in the conferences over on the right. And when that pressure gets so loud and so strong, that may be the moment when we see incremental change. I don't think it will come any other way, unless by some chance Justice, I mean, there's rumors that Justice is really interested in this from an antitrust perspective. And I'm not saying that, I'm just telling you, I've heard it's a rumor. I have no idea whether that's the case. Anything else? Yeah.
Dr. Kustra, Kurt David from Detroit, Michigan. As a result of my work with professional Olympic athletes, I'm very familiar with the exit statistics for athletes that transition from sports. I'm curious your opinion on what you see as the challenges for athletes that have not made it to the professional ranks. What some of those concerns might be of their transition from sports.
Well, the very first thing is programs of academic support early on in the student-athlete's career, which guarantee that a student-athlete is not going to leave without a degree. Is that what you're talking about, the problem of a student-athlete who leaves? And secondly, and I don't remember where I was recently, where someone was telling me about a program, and I know more than one school has these, where they've created a program for returning student-athletes, and they've reached out to student-athletes who have left early to play ball, and then after 3 or 4 years, whenever, they're coming back, and the university is responsible for that. You know, universities across the country have programs now. We call ours Finish in 4, and we'll sign a contract with a student. And basically what we say is, we will give you a schedule of classes that will guarantee you graduate in 4 years. If you follow that and then it takes you longer, it's our fault, and we'll pay your tuition until you graduate after those 4 years. That same philosophy of guaranteeing an education in 4 years, it doesn't have to be 4 obviously, but guaranteeing an education probably needs to be on the table when we discuss this issue of retention of student athletes and graduation of student athletes. The academic support is fine, and I'm really impressed with what I understand of the significant academic support provided to student athletes. What I'm not so sure we do is help them, once they've decided to leave, get back and finish the degree. And that's where we've got, I think, where we have significant work to do.
Andrew Winters. I'm a graduate here of St. Norbert, so the term student athlete really, means something to me. So I was curious how, and you mentioned it several times, how much you guys stress the student part of the student athlete. How does that mesh with what you said about we'll play on Monday, we'll play on Wednesday, whenever ESPN wants? How do those two concepts mesh to a Division I college president?
Yeah. I don't think if you talk to our football coach who spends his time disciplining the student athletes, tracking their schedules, I don't think that is a significant challenge for us. The fact of the matter is we have mandatory study halls. They can be on weekends, they can be during the week. Just if we play Tuesday night, there could likely be a study hall on Saturday afternoon. It doesn't mean just because we're not playing on Saturday afternoon that therefore the academic programs of our students are going to fall apart. Another thing that we do, I'm sure other programs do it, it is not uncommon for me to leave my office in the middle of a day to go to a meeting across campus and see one of our assistant coaches with a clipboard. They're going from class to class. They track down our student athletes as to whether they're in class. I don't know whether that's something that is done in 50% of the programs or 75% of the programs, but if you're doing that and making sure they're in class, and you're doing mandatory study halls and making sure they're in study hall, and you're playing on Tuesday or Wednesday, I don't think you jeopardize the academic integrity of the program much. And I think our GPAs show that. I mean, when you look at the number of students that are pulling down 3.0 and better, and when you look at our 974 APR rate, I think you can show that the day of the week you play is probably not going to make much difference. There are lots of problems with playing at those times, especially when you're a campus like ours that holds a lot of night classes. You want to wreak havoc with an evening program, try to hold a game on the same night. Everybody's supposed to be parking in the same place the fans park to go to class. So there are problems, but I've never detected a problem as far as the academic quality of the program is concerned. It's a good question. Okay, great. Hey, thank you so much. It's really been a delight being at St. Norbert's and to share the Norbertine tradition. Thank you.